I think it's so important as we talk about someone's journey to success, and for you starting from very humble beginnings and going all the way through to here we are in LA today in this oasis and everything in between, the sex, drugs and rock and roll. How has that shaped your perception of success and fame?
Well, it's funny because I grew up very, very poor. You know, I was born in Harlem in 1965, and my dad died when I was 2. My mother and I grew up on food stamps and welfare. But I also grew up in one of the wealthiest towns in the United States, Darien, Connecticut. So I was on food stamps and welfare, buying clothes at secondhand shops, and my friend had gated estates with tennis courts and spent their holidays going to Switzerland to go skiing, you know, or sailing to Bermuda. So I assumed when I was growing up, even the slightest bit of success, I would be the happiest person in the world. And so I worked very, very hard and ended up having, it might sound odd, but I ended up having a lot more success than I thought I was going to have. And the fascinating paradox is the more success I had, the less happy I became. You know, because I always thought if I made enough money, lived in the right place, dated the right people, had the right amount of prestige, I just assumed that happiness would ensue. Paradoxically, ironically, the exact opposite happened. Which is not to say there's anything wrong with material success. I mean, like, just look at the evidence. Like, material success, it's fine if you use it as a tool to accomplish things, but in and of itself, it doesn't deliver happiness.
And I guess it's sort of every next level, isn't it, of your life? And it's always this sort of I'll be happy when scenario, when I have this, or when I have the next best hit or the next best
Anything.
album. How do you define success now?
Defining success is such an interesting, good, challenging, hard question. Because our culture, and I'm stating the obvious, our culture quantifies success. You know, we have like very specific metrics that people apply to success, whether it's number of followers, how much money have you made, how many records have you sold, et cetera, et cetera. Like, how many times does your picture get published in like a Patrick McMullen or like Getty Images site? Like, are you going to the right parties, et cetera? And most people assume that if they can have like the perfect portfolio of quantified success, that, yeah, that happiness will ensue. And I had the perfect portfolio of quantified success and I was not happy. So now it's that question, it's almost like giving up an addiction, which I've done as well. Like, you base your life sort of like, you orient yourself towards something believing it will make you happy. And then when you finally look at the evidence and realize it doesn't work, you're then left a little bit bereft. And you have to ask yourself, okay, that didn't work, but I've spent my entire life figuring out how to do that thing that doesn't work. Now what do I do? And for me, the answer is like a combination of really simple things. It's health. I mean, it almost makes me think of my friend Dan Buettner. He has this concept, the blue zones. And he goes to these communities where people are happy and live long lives and figures out what makes them happy, what makes them live long lives. And usually it's like diet, you know, eat a healthy diet, exercise, community, and then a huge one is purpose, you know? And I feel like for me, that's like, and purpose doesn't have to be one thing, like, but multiple purposes, that's
Putting
largely
some
what
meaning
drives
behind
me.
it. Yeah. There's the Maslow hierarchy of needs. At the very top of the pyramid is the self-actualization needs. And obviously more so for very highly driven and ambitious people. But I guess the risk there is sort of almost turning it on its head. And when we place so much emphasis on, even if it's materialistic things or even if it's driving really hard and what that takes to reach your full ambition, sometimes we end up sacrificing the very core fundamentals of well-being.
Yeah, very much agree. And, you know, it's funny, I think it's, I feel like such an ignorant American, in either the Bill of Rights or in the preamble to the Constitution, there's this one line that I think has screwed up a lot of Americans. And it applies to a lot of humans, which is that every human being is entitled to life, liberty and the pursuit of happiness. And the pursuit of happiness has screwed up so many people because we live in this culture where people think like people are so desperate for happiness.
Absolutely.
And I think what's missing from that is context. You know, the existential context of like we're alive for a few decades in a universe that's 15 billion years old and vast beyond our imagining. It's kind of hard to be happy when it's sort of, there's a Buddhist component to this, or like where every day we get older and are more inclined towards illness and death. You know, so a lot of our happiness conventionally requires turning a blind eye to that. And then the other is just sort of the human condition. You know, you could argue in a hereditary way, we're hardwired to discontentedness.
Yes.
You know, humans are like, we're evolved from scared, angry creatures who are always hungry and always kind of terrified. Third thing is the context of the world in which we live. You know, with climate change, with pollution, with suicide rates, with war, with violence, with racism, et cetera, et cetera. Like there are lots of good things happening, but we also live in a very dysfunctional time. And so I don't know, it's almost like a St. Francis of Assisi paradox, where like the more you pursue happiness, the less happy you'll be. The more you pursue service and working for a cause bigger than yourself, and the less you focus on yourself, that's actually where happiness and well-being seems to come from.
I think that once we actually, exactly as you're saying, learn to be able to give back, and almost when you feel like you have nothing to give, it's like that's when you can give the most, and that's when you actually find that sense of happiness and that sense of purpose as well. So, and when it's connected to something that's larger than yourself, that's actually, as you say, puts it into context.
And it's liberating because, I mean, I know I spent a long time obsessively pursuing my own sort of like selfish, hedonistic material happiness. And I bottomed out as an alcoholic. I couldn't have real relationships. I alienated friends and family members. Like I became almost feral because I was so obsessed with pursuing my status and happiness.
Wow. Can you describe a little bit of what that was actually like at the height of your career, the touring as well as being on stage? What was that like?
Well, so when I started making music, I played in little punk rock bands. And like the first punk rock band I was in was called Vatican Commandos, and we put out a 7-inch single that sold 150 copies. And I thought that was success. And then my first solo single sold 1,000 copies. And I thought to myself, wow, I've just sold almost 10 times more copies than that punk rock single. And then, so I never expected anything beyond that. You know, I was pretty happy playing to 100 people a night. And then throughout the 90s into the 2000s, I ended up suddenly finding, you know, like selling millions of records. I mean, I remember one week, it would have been 2000 or 2001. I think there was one week where in that 1 week I sold 250,000 records.
Wow.
I was like,
wow.
So, and I was suddenly, instead of playing to 100 people a night, I was playing to 10,000 people a night, 50,000 people a night. And it was great. It was really fun. But then, as always happens, like I expected too much from that, you know? And I was dating movie stars, and I had a 5-level penthouse on Central Park West overlooking everything, and flying around the world and buying real estate and doing all the stuff I thought was gonna make me happy. Like when I bottomed out as an alcoholic, when I finally started going to AA and I was like, I'm bottomed out, I need sobriety, I need a change. Like, it was hard for me to accept that because in AA, one of the things you have to say is like, your life is unmanageable. And I was like, look, you know, like I've got homes all around the world. I've got plenty of money. I've got a 5-level penthouse on Central Park West. How is this unmanageable? But then I was like, oh, I don't have real friends. I can't have a relationship. I can't talk to my family members. I'm depressed and at times suicidal, and I'm sick. I'm like, oh, that's unmanageable. You know, like subjective, real metrics, as opposed to those, again, the quantifiable metrics that people try to use to like you can almost call them like Trumpian metrics, you know?
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
how much money do you have? How many properties do you have? How many whatever? And like at the end of the day, that doesn't, I mean, I feel like it's a cliche to say this, but I'm evidence that it's true. It doesn't work.
Are you glad you went through all of that?
Profoundly grateful that insofar as is possible, my worldview is not academic or abstract. You know, so when I say that materialism doesn't work, that's because I tried it. Like I desperately tried it. You know, it's not like I've read a book from the Dalai Lama saying materialism doesn't work and I'm just repeating what he said. Like I threw myself into
it. The experience that teaches you, doesn't it? Yeah.
And I'm so grateful that I basically went as far in the world of materialism and status as an individual in our culture can go. And it led me to a bottom. From that point, everything I learned has arisen from that point. So in a weird way, like when I was bottoming out, you know, depressed, anxious, drunk, drug addict, I did, all I wanted was to keep doing what I was doing, you know, to drink more, take more drugs, sleep with more people.
Harder, faster.
But I wanted it to make me happy. And when I finally admitted it wasn't making me happy, I was so mad and sad.
Yeah.
And
was there a defining moment for you, or a series of them that led to the point that you realized?
It was a lot of things. I mean, like thousands and thousands and thousands of little bits of evidence. But one of the big ones was, so growing up in and around New York, I had always obsessed over real estate. And there was this building on Central Park West. There was an architect named Emery Roth, and he built those very iconic limestone buildings on Central Park West and all around New York, like the ones that you think that's where Batman lives, you know. And I guess it was around 2004, 2005, thereabouts, the penthouse of one of these apartments came up for sale. And I couldn't believe it. Because it's one of those apartments where, like, when you look at it from the park, you think to yourself, no one actually could live there. Like, it's too perfect, you know. Or maybe you think, yeah, like Bruce Wayne lives there, or God lives there.
Yeah.
And I bought this apartment, spent 2 years renovating it, and while I was renovating it, I was convinced this is going to make me happy. Like, I'm going to move into this apartment, and I'm going to be the happiest person in the world, and I'm going to live there forever.
Yeah.
And I moved in, and it was perfect. I mean, like the marble fireplace and the Turkish rugs and the beautiful piano, and it had 5 balconies over 5 levels overlooking all of New York City. You could see Long Island Sound, you could see planes taking off at different airports. Like, it was the most perfect home. And I stood there waiting to feel complete. And I didn't. And then that was the moment where I was like, oh, this really isn't working.
Where were you in your career at that stage?
This was, I mean, career-wise, things were getting worse. You know, commercially, the peak of my success was 2001, 2002.
Yeah.
Like, that's
Just
when,
after Play.
Yeah, Play, and then the album 18. And then the album after that, Hotel, did really well in Europe, but didn't do very well in New Zealand, Australia, the States, England. And that's also when I was like drinking more, doing more drugs. So by the time I started like really bottoming out, my career was also, I was desperately trying to be successful, but success was sort of like material success in terms of album sales, it was slipping away.
Yeah.
And that made me panic.
In this day and age, in the digital era, it's not easy, but it's never been easier to probably start a business or to take your passions and materialize them. And I think there's also so much pressure out there to actually do what you love. And if you're not doing that, or if you're not successful in that, then you can't be happy or you're not successful. What's your thoughts on that?
One, my advice or thought is, and it sounds really cliched, but I believe this very truly, like, love what you do and do what you love.
Yeah.
And that will, like, everybody who's really succeeded, it's because they love what they do. You know, Warren Buffett loves what he does. That's right. Like he lives in a simple little house. He drives a simple little car. He gets his coffee at McDonald's, and he's the richest man, well, the third richest man in the world, because he loves what he does.
Yeah.
Elon Musk did not think, oh, how can I make tons of money? I'll start an electric car company. He loved the idea of, futurism and the electric car.
Yeah.
Love what you do. Listen to what other people say. You don't have to be controlled by what other people say, but like other people, a lot of times we all know, like people love giving advice. Listen to it.
Yeah.
And be smart enough to understand what they're really saying.
Yeah.
Like if you're a musician and you make a record and you play it for 10 of your friends and none of them like it, there's a good chance you've made a bad record. You don't have to like accommodate them, but be smart enough to incorporate other people's opinions. And the third, what's the third? Oh, look at the evidence, which is like our culture, and I could just ramble on about this for the longest time. What we hate as a species and a culture more than anything is evidence. We all have magical thinking. Like people believe like they can go to McDonald's and they can be healthy. People believe they can stay up all night drinking vodka and doing cocaine and be a healthy spiritual person,
Yeah.
That's not the way the universe works, and like luckily, and it's funny, like everybody else in the world has done the work for us already. All we need to do is figure out what they've done right and what they've done wrong.
I like that. That's a really good take on that. I think that there is so much to learn from, isn't there? And it's been really careful to seek that out. I think seek feedback, as you're saying, from friends and those who have gone before. And it's what's worked and what hasn't worked, and there's numerous success stories and there's numerous stories out there, of failure, which is some of the best lessons and things as well.
Yeah. And it's funny because one of the most surefire ways to fail is to look at other people's examples and say, well, that won't apply to me. To be a businessman and say like, oh, all those other businessmen, even when they succeeded, they had heart attacks and they're miserable, but thinking you can do exactly what they've done and somehow you'll be exempt from the consequences.
Yeah.
The universe is cause and effect, and it's so simple.
Yeah.
And we can see it physically. Like if I had a brick and I held it over my foot and I let go of the brick, it'll fall on my foot.
Yeah.
Everybody knows that, but the same consequences, the same results to actions apply to work and love and hedonism and all these things. Like everything has consequences. And boy, oh boy, we live in a culture where people just hate the idea that there are actually like how many times has someone who's like eaten nothing but garbage their entire life gotten cancer or heart disease and said it's so unfair? It's like, you ate McDonald's every day of your life. Like, it's sad. I'm sorry for you. But there's nothing unfair about it.
No.
Shoving garbage into your body makes you sick.
Why do you think we're like that? Why do you think we tend to think like that?
Because, and this maybe enters the realm of the slightly esoteric, we are our brains. Our brain is and I can sum it up very succinctly. Our brain is the most complicated thing the universe has ever produced. But if you're hiking, it still thinks that a stick is a snake. Meaning our brain is the smartest and dumbest thing in the universe. All it does is respond to hereditary cues, evolutionary cues, in terms of like it creates narratives based on neurochemistry. And those narratives are fed by our body. Internal and external. And the narrative was very consistent for all organisms for about 3.5 billion years. Like for humans, 100,000 years ago, it was, kill your enemies, eat lots of fatty, salty food, and if you accumulate stuff, you might live a day longer. And the brain is like, oh, okay, so it's the 21st century, it wants to go out and like kill its enemies, eat fatty food, and accumulate as much stuff as possible because it worked for 3.5 billion. That ethos and approach and methodology worked for billions of years. The problem is it just doesn't work anymore. And
not in the modern day.
And no one has figured out really how to tell the brain, like, come on.
It's a lot of rewiring, isn't it?
It's the 21st century. And that's where and the brain says, okay, here's the evidence that what we're doing is wrong. But then the brain also says, I have 3.5 billion years of neural conditioning.
Yes.
What's it going to trust?
Yeah.
Today or 3.5 billion years?
And how did you deal with things like self-doubt and fear and failure, resilience? There'd have to be so much of that.
Oh boy,
and,
yeah.
and self-belief. How did you build that up, or what did you?
I guess on one hand, I was always encouraged by my family to do creative stuff.
Yeah.
So I never doubted that. But I also never thought I was good at it. Like my drive has nothing to do with confidence.
Wow.
Like I've never, even to this day, like I'm okay at certain things, but I think most people who do what I do are better at it than I am. And there's a liberating humility there as well.
Absolutely.
Where you're like, oh, I play shows and I sing. I'm not a good singer, but I like singing. And like, there's just something really nice about not trying, but love what you do and understand that like what you create, what you put out into the world, it's not up to you. You can't control it once it leaves you. And I think that drives artists insane.
Yeah.
You know, and also like you can't control how people are going to perceive you. That also drives people insane. Like I love posting pictures on social media where I look old and crappy. Because I think that actually is more of a form of service than posting pictures like that are airbrushed and where I might look great. Because like when I look at a picture of someone my age who looks really great, I kind of hate them for it. You know, so like how are they doing a form of service by looking good and whatever? So like being average and loving what you do. And also there's this is not advice, but it worked for me, is don't have a plan B. But like if I had a child, I would say to them, have a plan B, have a plan C. But for me, what worked was I never knew how to do anything else.
Yeah.
And so even like there was a time in the late 80s, I was living in an abandoned factory. I didn't have heat or running water or a bathroom.
Yeah.
I was making $2,000 a year, and this abandoned factory was in a crack neighborhood. I didn't have a car. I didn't bathe that often, but I loved what I was doing, and it sustained me.
Yeah.
And if someone had said, oh, guess what? You're going to spend the rest of your life living in this abandoned factory, but you get to make music, I would have been like, oh, okay. You go out into the world, and when you get rejected, you're like, sure, I don't like being rejected, but you have a core of yourself, and you have a core of what you love to do.
Yeah.
And it's the sort of thing like, even now, like, I get lots of criticism because I'm very outspoken politically, whatever, and it reminds me that, and maybe I'm being very tangential, but there's a quote from Jesus, and I don't think of myself as a Christian in any conventional sense of the word, but I love this quote, which is, death, where is thy sting? And what he's saying is not, oh, you're not going to die. It simply says, take the power out of death, take the power out of failure, take the power out of criticism.
Wow.
By finding almost like refuge in yourself.
Yeah.
You know, and like, so when people, I get death threats, all sorts of like crazy criticism.
Death threats?
Oh yeah, from either like Trump supporters or whoever. But my response is like, what are you going to do?
Yeah.
Like what you can't, like the worst thing someone can do, they kill you. And I'm like, guess what? You're going to die anyway. Like, it's not like, so like, it's really nice when you realize other people, so you can like fail in public, weather tons of criticism, and still, I don't know, have integrity in the truest sense of the word.
That's interesting what you say about what you give power to. When do you know when to push and when to let go? When do you try and force something, or as we're saying, don't try and manipulate that outcome and just sort of let it go? Put it out there, put what you love out there, or how do you know when to hang on a sec, this isn't working? Do I in fact need that plan B?
Yeah. I mean, again, this is where like, I think I'm the worst person to ask for advice because my approach is so dumb in a way. My approach with everything has always been push as hard as you can, push foolishly whenever you can, and then be okay with failure.
Yeah.
I had to learn this because I used to,
Yeah.
like, failure is a really fascinating thing because, as you know, like, we hate failure. Everybody does everything in their power to avoid failure. Every great person is a product of failure. Like, it's really fascinating. Like, name me a successful person and I can find their failure. Bill Clinton, defeated as governor of Arkansas for his second term. That led him to go on to reinvent himself as a politician. Al Gore, defeated in 2000, led him to go on to, like, be on the board of Pixar and Apple, do An Inconvenient Truth, and win a Nobel Prize. Frank Sinatra's career bottomed out before he became really famous. Gandhi was a failed lawyer in South Africa, and that led him to reinvent himself as the savior of India. So we all
Wow.
hate failure when it's happening. Like me bottoming out as an alcoholic drug addict, like, I hated it. But that's the thing for which I'm actually most grateful.
Yeah. Even I think J.K. Rowling said that rock bottom was one of the strongest platforms that she used to build herself back up. So, in a sense, burnout, failure, the really low lows, of which there are so many when it comes to achieving the high highs, and it also comes with the low lows. It's all part of the journey, isn't it? And it's all part of actually what makes you successful in the end.
And yeah, and it's, I would say, I don't want to be like overly glib, but like, people rarely learn much from success. Like, success is so deceitful. I mean, I'm sure you've had this experience as well. Like, I can't count the number of times where, like, I or people I know have had success, and the immediate thought is, oh, I'm great. Like, I'm doing such a good job. It's like, no, you just happen to be doing the quasi-right thing at sort of the right time.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
doesn't predict anything for tomorrow.
No.
And that makes
no, that's
people
right.
insane. If you're willing to look at it, you then step back and say, like, oh, what didn't work? Like, what are my shortcomings? What didn't? And that's where, like, really sort of, like, I don't know, self-actualized successful people, I think, come from.
Yes.
It's kind of like,
Yes.
not to keep going back to AA, but, like, I meet people who are interested in getting sober, and unless they've bottomed out, I'm like, meh, why bother? And they're like, oh, but things really aren't working out. And it's like, no, you've got some new bottoms to plumb. Like, until you get to that really bottom, you're not going to ever be willing to humbly do the work.
Yeah. And I think we've spoken about it before in the sense that it's really hard, you mentioned, to tell someone that they're burnt out or they're burning out. You know, it's sort of like, it can come across as quite patronizing, I guess, for some people, kind of, and quite resentful. And it's sort of, it can be annoying when people say you work too much, or you're this or that, or you're going off the rails, or whatever. And it can be quite a sensitive thing, can't it?
Oh, absolutely. Especially for, like, type A people who pride themselves on being masters of the universe.
Yeah.
And that's where, just, like, if you can, just let them figure it out by looking at the evidence. Like, say to them, like, okay, you're on your third marriage, you're cheating on your third wife with 2 different porn stars. Sorry, I'm talking about the president. And I was like, and you're miserable. You have the beginnings of gout. You have heart disease. Your children won't talk to you, et cetera, et cetera. I was like, just look at the evidence.
So looking back over your career, the successes that you've had, you're now a restaurant owner as well, Little Pine here in Silver Lake, and you do a lot with charities and not-for-profits, and a lot with animal rights. Looking back and comparing this with music, or how that all integrates, what is some of the things that you're most proud of? Is it music or is it other?
I mean, music for me at this point is something I love, but I don't see it as a job. Luckily, no one buys records anyway. So, like, for a 53-year-old guy to go out and monetize music would be almost impossible. So, like, I love making music, but I don't really try to monetize it. I don't think of it as a job. It's just something I love doing. So when I release a song or a record, I don't really expect too many people to pay attention, and I don't really expect to make money from it. And there's a liberation there where I can just do it purely for the love of doing it. And then all the other things, you know, my restaurant, Little Pine, I run it as a nonprofit. So, like, any profits that are generated go to animal rights organizations, and I do a lot of political work and working with other nonprofits and trying to produce documentaries, but everything is done for the love of doing it, but also with the idea of like, and this is very presumptuous on my part, like, I think I want to try and help. You know, I want to try and help our species. I want to try and help animals. I want to try and help our planet. Like, if I can just be a part of the process that maybe leads us to a healthier, better, more sustainable future, that's my goal. You know, and that's so like, so pride. I don't think I have pride. I hope. I mean, I'm sure I'm human. Of course, I have ego. I have pride, but like, I don't like. I love what I do, and I'm driven by the idea of being of service. But I don't take pride in it. To me, it just seems like, oh, that's what you do.
Yeah.
Like, it makes a lot more sense than like times in my life where I didn't like what I was doing and I was driven by personal gain. Like, that didn't work. So now it's like, oh, love what you do, try to be of service, try to be open, try to learn. But like, I don't.
Do you feel that that's a responsibility that people that are perhaps quite high profile have now? Do you think that people should be using their voice as a platform for social change?
Ideally, yes. The word responsibility, I'm not, that I can't be that presumptuous and say like other people should try and, in their own way, whatever, do what I do. I don't know. But it does seem like if you look at it by any quasi-objective standard or criteria, like a billionaire trying to make more money simply so they have more money, like, why? Like, who cares? Like, you know, buying a 6-bedroom apartment on Park Avenue and as opposed to the 4-bedroom apartment you already have, like, why? Like, buying a $500 million yacht, why? Like, just the why, like, the like, it would be wonderful if we lived in a world that wasn't an inch away from collapse and catastrophe. By all means, go be selfish. You know, like, if we lived in a world where everyone was self-actualized, there was no more war, there was no rape, there was no bigotry or discrimination, there was no climate change, there was no antibiotic resistance, etc., then sure, go be selfish. But we don't live in that world.
Yeah.
And if you're smart enough to make that much money, you're smart enough to observe the world and say it desperately needs help.
Yeah.
And to me, that's a much better use of time and resources than buying a stupid boat. You know?
Yeah.
Like, and then suddenly you find like, 'cause I have friends who've done that, and they find themselves like, suddenly they're in the Mediterranean having a party with like professional sex workers and people they've never met, and they're asking themselves like, what am I doing? Like, what? Like, you could do anything, and you're spending your time and money like doing drugs with strangers. Like, that's just not a good use of a life. And I can say that because I found myself on many occasions doing drugs with strangers. So
Yeah. Do you miss any of that?
no, I miss the ignorance. You know, I miss, like, when I was in my 30s and I was drinking and doing drugs and touring constantly, I believed that materialism and worldliness were going to answer all of my questions and fix all of my problems. And there was a naive ignorance to that, and that was fun. You know, like, there's a very sheltered provincial aspect to that. You know, and I look back at it, I'm like, oh, I'm a little wistful. Like, sure, it'd be fun to step back into that, but no, I believe that if you're happy, I was gonna say happy with where you are, but just like, that doesn't mean physically or materially. It means like, if you're happy with your perspective, you can't be too upset with any of the things that have led you to have that perspective.
Absolutely.
You know, like, there's always that question, like, what would you change? And it's like, nothing. I wouldn't change the humility. I wouldn't change the degradation. I wouldn't change the failure. I wouldn't change the mistakes, because right now I'm really grateful for the weird perspective that I have.
One of the key things that keeps coming up is be true to yourself and do things in a way that is true to you, and that'll essentially lead you to, you know, on the path that you're meant to be. Yeah,
true to yourself, but I would say be true to yourself insofar as you can, but also learn from other people's mistakes. Like, I just watched the documentary on that fire festival failure, and I was like, look at what they did, don't do that. Like,
Yeah.
don't be a sociopath who lies, cheats, and steals. You know, like a basic code of ethics could serve
Yeah.
people pretty well. Like some basics,
Yeah.
like don't kill, don't rape, don't lie, don't steal.
Yeah.
Those 4 things, you're probably good. Like, oh, and treat people with respect.
Yeah.
You know,
It's just the
as much
basics,
as you
isn't
can.
it?
And like, it's amazing how so many people are willing to like throw ethics aside to pursue weird selfish gains, and then not surprisingly you end up bankrupt or in prison or both. People feeling like consequences don't apply to them, people feeling like ethics don't apply to them, and they do.
And again, using the words responsibility, but I think we can say that there. Everybody does have a responsibility. Finding, I guess, that moral compass, isn't it? And staying true to that in that sort of sense.
Yeah, and recognizing that a moral compass is not abstract or academic. You know, like the people who don't lie, the people who don't cheat, the people who don't steal, the people who don't rape, the people who don't kill are the people who tend to actually be like successful over a long period of time.
Yeah.
You know, like
Absolutely.
I think like look at Warren Buffett. Like one of the reasons he's had a remarkably weird successful life is because he has a code of ethics that means that he's now in his 90s and he's respected and he's not in jail. You know?
When you're talking about success and happiness and what's really sustainable, because there are certain things that drive people for that short-term success, and a lot of that can be based around, you know, corruption or not doing the right thing. But when you look at long-term success and what actually is fulfillment and happiness and meaningful, I think that's 2 separate things, isn't it?
Yeah.
2 separate approaches.
And I think that's a really like of all the things we've talked about, that is actually one of the things I would like to stress the most. Is we live in a culture where people like, and I don't want to get in trouble, but I'm going to say like social media influencers. Some of them are really nice people, but a lot of them have never made anything, and their success came from nothing.
That's right.
And if your success and your life are based, like if you don't have a foundation, it doesn't last. It's like the 3 Little Pigs.
That's right.
You know, like
Yeah.
like you can't build a house without a good foundation. You can't have a career and a life without a good work ethic. Having a good work ethic
It's
and a
good
good
old-fashioned
foundation.
work, which sometimes these days is
Yeah.
just really hard to find, isn't it, and come by.
Yeah.
I think just having that ethic, as you say, the work ethic and the attitude towards that, putting in the hard yards and having respect for the people that have gone before and learning from them, success and the failures.
Yeah,
That's
I mean,
what sets you up.
you can get something from nothing, but it tends to not last very long, and it tends to not be very substantial. You know, as we see with all the like the social media stars who like come and go, like it just hard work
what's
with a good
lasting?
foundation creates sustainability.
Yeah.
You know, and there's no replacement for that.
No.
You know, but it's hard because people live in this culture where you're right, they want immediate gratification. You know, they want 1 million followers, they want lots of sex and drugs and fast food and etc. But they don't. So it's like I mean, you could, on a neurological way, you could say like people are basically living in their brainstem. You know, like the very unevolved parts of their brain. Like you have your prefrontal cortex, which is the more like rational, executive, long-term thinking. People are never taught how to live there.
No.
You know, we live in this culture that just prioritizes immediate gratification.
Yeah.
And there's nothing morally wrong with immediate gratification, but it is profoundly unsustainable and it leads to long-term misery.
Yeah.
So it's not like the old Judeo-Christian thing of saying like immediate gratification is bad, but you're not going to have a good, long, healthy, sustainable life if you're focused on immediate gratification. Like that's just like a law of the universe.
Yeah. Absolutely.